Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us today for the Global Skills Spotlight event, discussing how can we unlock the potential of the technical and vocational education and training to support the development of growing economies. My name is Mohamed Al-Abdor and I'm a project manager at the British Council Sudan office. The Global Skills Spotlight series of online discussions are regular discussions bringing together partners from around the globe, sharing insight, experiences, and discussing key topics for the global importance. So during these sessions, and specifically for our sessions today, we will discuss how can we unlock the potential of TVET, which is technical and vocational education and training to support the development of growing countries, focusing on Sudan. So let me tell you about today's event. The session will be recorded and later on this session might be available for those who want to kind of revisit the session or share with the others. If you have any questions or comments during the discussions, please use the Q&A, the chat bubble that you see. Use the Q&A function, and if it's for a specific panelist, please just add their name first and then ask the question. Also, you can just vote the questions for us to know and to identify the most relevant questions. Captions, of course, are available in English, and you can use just the click on the CC icon and caption will appear for you. Yes, so let me introduce to you today our speakers, our amazing panelists, starting with the UK consultant, our UK consultant, John Mountford. Just a bit of introduction about John. John is a TVET sector expert, specializing in development and delivery of international programs and projects. He's held strategic roles in the UK Sector Skills Council, TVET College, and university sector, including on a national level representing England Further Education College sector as the Association of College International Director. Right after John, we will have Mattia Oliveira from the UNESCO headquarters. He is the project officer for the section of youth literacy and skills development, and he is the coordinator for the TVET activities as part of the CABIT program in Sudan. Right next, we do have our lovely local Sudan consultants representing Savannah Innovation Lab. We do have Yusuf Yahya and Mariam. Yusuf is the founder and the managing director of Savannah Innovation Lab. Savannah Innovation Lab focuses on upskilling Sudanese change maker, incubating and accelerating Sudanese startups, ensuring they are equipped to succeed in today's digitalizing global economies. Yusuf is the World Economic Global Chamber, a member of the Pan-African Policy Network, I4 Policy, a founding member of the Sudanese Innovation and Entrepreneurship Alliance. Also, Yusuf shared a panel with the World Bank President on his visit to Sudan and represented the Sudan as an innovation ecosystem in the Sudan Paris Conference. Yusuf holds a degree in international relationship and certificates in investment banking and finance. Very interesting bios of our speakers today. Let's go to the next one. Yes, the next one is Mariam Jarannabi. She is the co-founder and the program manager at Savannah Innovation Lab. Key focus on the upskilling, as I mentioned, of Sudanese youth incubating. Mariam also holds a degree in international development from the York University, with concentration of gender development and policy and public policy, as well as certificates in refugee and migration studies from the York CRS with the regional focus in East Africa. Yes, so these are our speakers and main panelists for today. We are going to hear more from our speakers, but before we go into our speaker, I will give you a bit of introduction about the intervention that happens in Sudan. So the Global Skills Spotlight being delivered as part of the British Council led a study of the TVET sector in Sudan, and after, I would say part of that started with the desk research of a heavy heavy documents representing different sectors and different parts of the sector in Sudan. And then a couple of introductions and roundtables took place with government agencies, employers representing the private sector, development partners, and training providers. And at the end of that, we did have a roundtable discussion, hearing recommendation for the British Council TVET sector program intervention from different partners. What we'll be having today is the Global Skills Spotlight webinar, and we'll be describing the Sudanese TVET context, the role of TVET in catalyzing development, the role of TVET in supporting social partnership and priorities. Of course, we do have an opportunity for discussion on key questions relating to the TVET intervention in unlocking the potential of developing economies. Just as a reminder, before we go directly to our speakers, our first speaker, John Manford, if you do have any question, please make sure to send it through the Q&A pop-up icon. And of course, if you want to direct one question specifically to one panelist as they speak, please do so, and also you can vote the questions. Without further ado, I will pass the floor to our first speaker, John Manford. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you. So, thank you, Mohammed. And yeah, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So, as Mohammed introduced, myself and colleagues from the Savannah agency have been working, developing a scoping study of the Sudanese TVET context and areas of potential interventions which can support the role of TVET in the sort of economic transformation agenda. And as part of our scope, some of the context we're working in, and just to set the scene almost, if you like, is things like the sort of the demographic bulge, if you like, that Sudan, like not untypically in the African context, has a young population, and depending on various sources, around 19 years old is the median age. There's issues with learners not being in school and children being out of school, as around 3 million children aged 5 to 13 are out of school at the moment. There's issues with poverty, and looking at the human development in UNICEF's human development quote from UNICEF's the Human Development Index. Sudan ranks about 167 out of 189 countries. There's been economic challenges, not least because of COVID, which has seen the economy shrink by around 8.4% in 2020, on top of a drop of 2.5% in 2019. You've got issues of unemployment, but also underemployment as well, with people often in fragile jobs, and quite often these challenges are increasingly manifested on regional age and gender-based disparities as well. And some of these have been increased, but also probably impacted on things like government fragility as well. And obviously, there's been the recent issues with coups and so on, and the growing social unrest that manifested through that. We've also seen examples of sort of gendered allocation of roles and all the associated inclusion issues that come with that as well. Sudan has a large informal economy and lots of small, micro, medium-sized businesses, and all the sort of associated challenges around perceived opportunity costs with training and the effect that can have on TVET as well. So just to sort of try and summarize the context, some of the challenges that the TVET sector is supporting and looking to address, but also obviously affected by, are things related to the economy, to technology, and increasingly how Sudan can respond to the needs of the fourth industrial revolution, for example, the demographic challenges, socio-political challenges, and also, of course, importantly, sustainability as well, the green agenda and how training can support the development of green skills for green jobs. And within all of that, a driving factor behind the study we've been doing is the key role that TVET has in providing the skills that individuals need, that local and national industry needs, and their communities needs to help to develop and address some of these challenges. So if we can move on, please. However, despite the key role TVET has in that, there's obviously challenges and there's realities we need to be conscious of. There's a small percentage of Sudanese employees who have come through the TVET route. In fact, the latest data indicates around, or just over 2%, or at least between 2 and 3% of the workforce hold a vocational training or technical certificates. So there's a lack of transition from the TVET sector into employment, or there's a lack of willingness for employers to hire learners from TVET. But anyway, the TVET is, there's not a flow from technical vocational education into employment. And that can be part explained by data which suggests a lack of engagement between training providers and employers, with only 11% of employers in a fairly recent policy review indicating that they had the opportunity to engage with training providers to talk about their skills needs and requirements. And that is part caused by and part explained by negative public and industry perceptions of training and the quality of training. And again, not atypically, a perception that TVET is a second choice or even a last resort for a lot of learners. So there's certainly work to be done around promoting the attractiveness of VET, the value of VET, and how VET can impact on employers and learners' lives. So there's a certain core perception issues which need to be addressed. And that is, again, is tied up with an assumption that TVET is government business, that it's supply side led, that it's public sector, and it's not driven by demand from industry and employers. So on that basis, we feel strongly that there's a need for a more enabling environment for stakeholders to interact with each other, and through that platform, through those interactions, allow stakeholders, particularly on the demand side, on the industry employer side, to be engaged in the design and delivery of training. And through a focus on that area, we feel that some of these perception issues, some of these transition issues from training to employment will be addressed. There's also concerns around skills gaps, that the curriculum that is being utilised in the TVET sector isn't reflective, is out of date and isn't reflective of industry needs and industry standards. So again, there's a need to bring employers into that conversation to help the upgrading of instructors, curriculum, and resources to despite the challenges that those all involve, to help to bring a more aligned, stronger alignment between the skills that the vocational education and training sector graduates possess and those that employers need. And just generally, some of the realities we've observed are things like teacher and learner performance, equipment that's out of date, issues with the capacity of management and institutional management to sort of position and drive their institutions to be more flexible and autonomous and adaptive to industry needs, outdated curriculum, infrastructure challenges around buildings, and the need for a more inclusive, JESI embracing sector as well. And despite all these challenges, I think it would be unfair to leave it solely on that note. It is, these realities are also imbued with an enthusiasm by practitioners and a willingness to train and move their learners forward as well. So I think that would be unfair just to give a list of challenges. There are also a positive, hard-working sector there as well. So moving on, please. Sorry, if you can get the next slide. Thank you very much. There is a huge opportunity for technical vocational education training to make a contribution to Sudan's economic development. There's a real growing demand for skilled workers in priority sectors, including the agricultural value chain, so moving along different points of the value chain through to things like food processing, and so that more technical aspect of agricultural development and production, construction, mining, and then increasingly sort of the technical end of the TVET spectrum, if you like, things working in ICT, telecoms, manufacturing and engineering. So there is a real need for TVET, and from that need we can perceive opportunities in a range of different areas. Also, there's a strong government policy to try and lead on the diversification from traditional roles through the introduction of new sectors, and also sort of the adding of value to primary commodities as well, and using that to help with the exporting of developing export opportunities. So there's this diversification agenda. There's a demand for skilling and upgrading the skills into different sectors, but also the diversification for additional roles as well. There's a key need to help this clearer progression from employment to education. As I referenced earlier, it's low at the moment. So there's a big opportunity to make a significant jump for learners who are in training to reach to employment. TVET represents an exciting opportunity to support inclusion agendas, access agendas, and the embedding of GESI values as well, but through having a sector more aligned with inclusion aspects, that will have an impact on how inclusion is reflected in employment as well. TVET has a key role to support the development of green skills that are needed to support green jobs and all the sustainable economic transformation that will bring. There's opportunities for TVET to support the informal economy, not least through the recognition of prior learning as well, that there is a strong informal economy and obviously skills within that. And if there's some resetting of technical education to capture the skills that currently exist and map them into frameworks, then that will help the development of standardization of skills more broadly as well, and including through things by defining occupational standards and qualification frameworks as well. There's also the growing capacity development of TVET. There's a lot of development initiatives currently going on in Sudan, and Mattia will be talking about those later. And on that basis, the sector is growing. The capacity is growing, and it's creating a forum for that enthusiasm I spoke about earlier to actually make a really strong impact. So there are green shoots and things that can be nurtured and developed in the sector as well. And another area linked to that is there's a real opportunity for TVET to support the capacity and resourcing of learners to start their own business, to find self-employment as well, whether that's through acting as incubators or the providing of strong employability skills or forum for mentors to support learners as well. So there's a number of significant opportunities for TVET to contribute to Sudan's economic development and address some of those challenges that we spoke about. So yeah, if we can go to the next slide, please. So some of the interventions that we've been developing and looking at to support that capacity building at TVET to meet those challenges are things like trying to support initiatives to introduce system reforms, and whether that's on a national governance level or on a supporting wider labour market initiatives, bringing in demand side stakeholders and so on. So that sort of policy level system reform. We're also very interested in interventions that would help build employers' capacity, and also importantly their enthusiasm to engage with TVET activities, both in the designing of training, but also importantly in the delivery of training as well. So we often make the assumption, if you like, that employers should be involved in training, but actually we have to create an environment and a structure that they can have the capacity and the willingness to get in to deliver that process. So we feel interventions to create that environment will be important. There's opportunities for interventions to help to develop instructors' understanding of skills needs, so they have a closer sight of what employers are demanding, and equally working with employers to support their pedagogic confidence to deliver training themselves, to sort of embedding that sense of dual professionalism in TVET. So you'd have employers who have pedagogic skills to deliver or mentor training, and you would have instructors who have a better understanding of what employers need and what industry requires as well. We also feel there's a big need to support the development of LMI activities, both the capacity to deliver them, not solely on a national level, also on a local level as well, so that the training institutions understand how to access a network of local employers, and that employers feel that they're capacitated to engage in labour market information activities as well. So that sort of conversation, that platform, that addressing that 11% figure I mentioned earlier, if you like, that how can we create or support the creation of LMI capacity and interest and forums. We feel it's important to look at how we can support the development of work-based curriculum and delivery models as well, to address that relevance issue. If only 2.3% of workers hold a TVET certificate, then that's an indication that there are concerns that they don't have the skills that employers need. And one way we can support that challenge is by moving TVET to the workplace and the workplace to TVET as well, by having more advanced work-based learning teaching, including things like apprenticeships as well. So the actual training of employees using apprenticeship contracts as a way to deliver training. Promoting campaigns that support the attractiveness of TVET to employers and also to learners. So to encourage, to challenge these preconceptions that TVET isn't first choice, that it's somehow a second route. So actually this is not the case, that it can have really important outcomes for learners as well, and also benefit employers and their communities, and so on. Also running campaigns that promote inclusive VET as well, that different groups, different communities, different regions understand how they can engage in VET, using state case studies and mentors and so on. So how can we make VET appear more inclusive, more attractive to different groups as well? Also, the sort of capacity building of the sector as well. So whether there could be interventions that help the leadership. So would there be leadership development programs? And that could be at different levels. That could be at sort of a governance policy level, but also on an institutional level. That could vocational training centre leaders be capacitated to make their institutions a bit more autonomous and flexible and confident in meeting with employers and understanding employers' needs? Are there accreditation opportunities to sort of embed quality models and capture those quality models, both to help the sector to understand the framework it needs to increase its capacity and delivery, but also to reassure its partners about the quality of the training that's been delivered as well. And then finally, investment and support for training resources and tools to try and update some of those outdated delivery resources environment. Important opportunities around supporting careers advice and guidance, making sure that learners understand where jobs are, and that and recruiters understand where learners are as well. So the sort of mapping of job opportunities to learners. That issue around recognition of prior learning and tied into that lifelong learning as well. And importantly, the integration of ICT. How can we take advantage of new learning models and mediums and new confidence in them and bring those into TVET as well? So there's some of the areas through our scoping and our research that we've been identifying, which we feel can support the Sudanese TVET sector in capacity building itself to address some of the challenges we spoke about and embrace some of those opportunities we saw as well. So there are a few introductory statements from myself. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues Miriam and Yusuf now, who have been conducting this scope on the ground in Sudan, and they're going to share some ideas from their perceptions on how they have on stakeholders' views who they've been talking to through this study. So thank you very much, and over to you, Miriam. Miriam, I think you're on mute.
Yes, Miriam and Yusuf, you are still in mute. Yeah, I think Miriam and Yusuf are having some technical issues, but until it's fixed, yes, of course, thank you, John, for the presentation. Of course, there is a bit of a challenge and a gap between the employers and the training providers, and also a gap between the employers and the graduates from the vocational training centers. But despite these challenges, there are potential for intervention, impactful intervention in developing countries. So thank you very much, John, British Council consultant and a TVET sector expert. So now I think we'll move on to our next speaker until we have this problem solved with Miriam and Yusuf. Our next speaker is Mattia Olivari. He's representing the UNESCO, one of the leading partners in Sudan who are having lots of intervention, and also they've been conducting several activities related to TVET. So over to you, Mattia.
Thanks, Mohamed. If I can have the presentation on, it would be great. There you go. Thanks a lot. So just to introduce briefly myself, my name is Mattia Olivari. I'm working currently at UNESCO headquarters on everything linked to TVET within the section for youth literacy and skill development. We are basically the section of the education sector of UNESCO that defines the strategy for TVET for the organization. And therefore, this finds an application in the different areas of work of the organization around the world, specifically also through different programs that we are currently coordinating. One of them is, for example, the CAPET program, which I will be talking about. Concerning myself, I've experience in education and TVET, but I'm also coming from more like the policy dimension side, as I've been spending 10 years previous to joining UNESCO in the OECD, conducting different type of activities with links with TVET in developing countries, including Sudan. The presentation today, I will just basically give you an overview of what is the new strategy that UNESCO is currently launching for TVET. Something that has been elaborated in the last months because UNESCO just concluded the first, let's say, period in which the first strategy that launched for TVET in 2016 was finished in 2021 with an evaluation that has been conducted last year, and we are now in the process of launching the new one that will cover the period 2022-2029. If you can go to the next slide, please. This new strategy for TVET is essentially trying to address a number of issues that are faced around the world, and this is something that is kind of an overarching slide because it provides you some of the, let's say, transition, we can call it dimensions that we are trying to tackle with our strategy on TVET, and I thank John because his presentation already touched upon some specific of these issues, some issues linked to those that I am showing here in the context of Sudan. What we basically want to cover with our strategy and try to address our activities in TVET is first of all the problem linked to everything in terms of economic recovery. Of course, we are coming from a period in which COVID-19 affected economies everywhere. We saw that Sudan had a GDP decrease, significant GDP decrease over last year, but something is expected to come also in the next future, and there will be additional problems, which is because COVID is not over, unfortunately, particularly in terms of medium to long-term consequences in the economy and the society. Of course, TVET has a huge role to play in the context of technological change, digitalization, automation, the availability of new technologies, including the 5G, as well as artificial intelligence. Now we're talking about metaverse. All of these elements are leading to a new industry 4.0, as we used to call it here in UNESCO. And this is something that TVET needs to take into consideration and will be able to address, according to us, if we have a comprehensive strategy that can cover all of these domains. Informality, we discussed about Sudan and the role of informality, thanks to John. It's a very important point that we need to bear in mind, and we need to take into consideration when we discuss about TVET, particularly in the context of developing countries where informality is a very significant reality. And then, of course, we have the demographic transition. Bulges of population entering the labor market is something that we need to face, and TVET is in the interface between the world of education and the world of work. It's a kind of it's the tool that should platform that should facilitate the insertion of the youth in the labor market, facilitating sort of a learning environment to work environment transition. These bulges are very important to be considered when we design any type of TVET strategy, and we need to bear in mind that we need to be ready to have large cohorts of youth entering the labor market. And then, of course, everything linked to societal and political issues. The right to education, intergenerational solidarity, migration are all elements that we can somehow address either directly or indirectly with TVET. Again, as well, sustainable development. The UN is working towards, as you may know, this framework of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we need to incorporate all of these elements into this new TVET strategy definition. Climate change, biodiversity, green transitions are just some of the elements that we may want to touch upon when we discuss about TVET. Next slide, please. Here, I just want to stress that this is let's say, preliminary presentation because the strategy has not been launched yet. The new UNESCO strategy for 2022-2021 for TVET, 29 for TVET. The strategy has been the result of long consultation that we had over last year with our partners, and in the following months, we will have some validation from executive bodies within the UNESCO and an official launch of the strategy in July. These are the key axes of, let's say, action, strategic priorities, we may call them, that we decided to work on in the next 8 years. Particularly, our strategy will aim at developing skills for individuals, particularly to allow them having a decent learning environment, be able to work and live decent lives. And in this respect, actions in this area, which again aligns with what's been said by John, are in the context of the promotion of flexible lifelong learning pathways, and as well the creation of targeted measures for the inclusion and gender equality, which are important elements for UNESCO mandate in general, but for TVET in particular. And we also have a very, we pay very much attention to vulnerable groups outside of simply gender and youth, but also rural areas versus urban areas, disadvantaged people in specific portion of the population. There are more details that will come when we will be publishing the strategy. The second big pillar of activity of action for our strategy is the creation of the promotion and development of skills for inclusive and sustainable economies. The idea is really to look at this sort of alignment between what is demanded and what is supplied in the job market. So what TVET should deliver in terms of skills, type of curricula, skills to be provided and people should be equipped with, and what is demanded by the economies where these people that are actually being trained will have to find a job, a decent job. So we're talking about identifying skills, for example, in the context of the digital and green economies. This is something relevant that we introduced. We're looking at delivering TVET to address youth employment and meet demand for digital and green transition at the workplace, online, but also with other learning settings. Of course, we're bearing in mind that STEM skills are very important in these 21st centuries, together with entrepreneurial and the so-called 21st century skills. And also, we want to support in this process of transition from the learning to the working environment, the role of the teaching workforce and the TVET institution. You may know that UNESCO has a wide network of institutions operating in TVET called UNEVOC network, which is coordinated by colleagues in Germany, and we are working closely with them in that sense. And of course, again, reinforcing governance and unlocking investment, something which is very up to date and important for the situation of Sudan in particular. Then we have the development of skills for inclusive and peaceful societies. Here we're talking a bit more like TVET promoting citizenship, the capacity of people and individuals to be participatory and global citizens, particularly looking at the, let's say, right-based education integration into TVET curricula, global and participatory citizenship, but also promoting TVET institutions as places in which to promote social integration and cohesion, promoting values of equity and etc. So these are all elements that we want to take into consideration. Next slide, please. Of course, the three pillars that I identified before are standalone in a way, but are very interconnected, because we just, for the ease of presentation, identified those three, but they're very interconnected. And the links that we see among them in terms of implementation are in these areas, levers that are identified here. First of all, in the context of national, regional, and global policy learning, UNESCO will be very active in this domain. The TVET policy review for Sudan has been mentioned earlier on. This is one of the places where this is one of the tools that we use in respect, and that informs transversally all of the areas of work of this new TVET strategy. Then we have the work on data, which is very important because we need to always bear in mind that collecting data and being evidence-based is of key importance, particularly when we talk about providing effective TVET trainings to align with the demand of the labor market. And then we have normative instruments, because UNESCO, as you may know, is an implementation organization that also have a number of normative text and regulation that needs to be respected when we perform and we implement our mandate, particularly in the domain of education and also in TVET. And then, of course, UNESCO and our work on TVET will rely a lot on platforms, networks, and partnerships that we developed over the years and that are very active. I already mentioned the UNEVOC network, but there are many others that we are actually leveraging to implement our strategy. One of them is the Interagency Group on Technical and Vocational Education and Training, the AGTVET, we call it. Then we have the Teacher Task Force, that of course is an impact on the teaching capacity in the TVET domain. And then we have this platform, which is the Global Education Coalition, which was developed in the let's say during the outbreak of the COVID pandemic to let's say address the urgency of some of the needs of the education systems around the world, in developing countries particularly, and within which we developed the so-called Global Skills Academy and the Broadband Commission that focused specifically on digital skills provision in the context of TVET in the different phases of the outbreak of the COVID-19 situation. If you can go to the next slide, please. Here, moving from the, let's say, the overarching vision of UNESCO and transiting into something more operational, we, from the global perspective, go to the national perspective of different countries, particularly using a number of programs that UNESCO is currently coordinating. One of them is CAPED. And this program is a program which is an extra budgetary program created in 2003. It's supported by a contribution from Finland, France, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden at the moment. The focus of this program is on developing capacity for education in different domains. We have three thematic areas mainly identified, which is particularly relevant for us in this context is the skills development one, where we include literacy and TVET, but also teachers, sector-wide policy and planning that are listed there. The focus in terms of countries that we cover with this program, we don't cover all of the countries, all of the member states, but we work with member states which are in the group of least developed and fragile countries. We have 25 countries covered for the time being within this group. CAPED essentially is a platform that we use to mobilize expertise in these categories with these resources in these thematic areas to help LDCs to attain SDG 4 objectives, in line with what I just said in the UNESCO TVET strategy. I'm happy to coordinate this activity thanks to the help of my colleague Vael Mustafa, which is I think online as well, That's the coordinator locally for the activities we conduct in Sudan. And thanks to him as well for all the support. Next slide, please. So entering specifically into the context of Sudan, you can go directly to the next slide. So as John mentioned before, we conducted the TVET policy review, which is part of our TVET strategy from 2016-2021. This is a tool that we use largely to kind of do a diagnostic of the problem of countries in the context of specific thematic areas, like TVET in this case. And essentially, we identified with this work 7 priority considerations for enhancing TVET, particularly in terms of relevance, efficiency, and effectiveness in Sudan. As you may see here, the first one is the necessity for development of a comprehensive TVET strategy, which we did, reforming governance and develop an overarching national qualification frameworks, which is as well ongoing and we are progressing. I will give you more details. Improving the quality and enhancing the efficiency of existing TVET programs, staff and facilities. We're working on expanding access and addressing marginalization. As I mentioned, vulnerable groups are a key priority for UNESCO activities overall. Providing career guidance and counseling, securing sustainable resources, and enhancing the perceived image of TVET. Again, this is very much aligned with what John just said, and we are happy to see that we are on the same page in this, because this is the direction that we'd like to undertake also for the next future, now that we are setting the work plan for CAPED in the next years. If you go to the next slide. So just to provide some key concrete examples of what we've been doing over the last years. They say that the national team implements sort of a UNESCO participatory approach and decided to focus on 3 priority areas that are part of the priorities that I listed before, and these are the ones that have been tackled first in terms of action. First, the development of an harmonized national TVET strategy, which was highly in demand, and we decided that that was a priority to act upon immediately. For the time being, the country background report and the final and the pre-final TVET strategy draft been delivered and validated by key stakeholders. As I said, it's a participatory approach with a number of stakeholders involved. As you can see, there's an interministerial committee that has been formed, including undersecretaries of the Ministry of the Cabinet Affairs and Ministry of Education, of Higher Education, the MOL, to coordinate on the governance of TVET and provide political support all along the way. Within 5 main focus areas that have been identified for work in the context of this strategy: governance and management, quality and relevance, access and equity, financing and funding, and monitoring and evaluation. Second big pillar of action has been the development of a national qualification framework. Baseline report exists and it's ready to embark. We have a capacity development on NQF delivered to the national team as well. We essentially try to develop capacity in terms of NQF design, setup, and implementation at national level. And then we're working again on the quality loop, let's say. We're trying to enhance the capacity and support TVET institution in promoting quality and enter this sort of virtuous cycle to promote quality. ICT capacity for selected TVET institution staff were developed. We organized training sessions on fundamentals of quality management and also engage with private sector actors in that sense. Can you please go to the next slide? Wrap up. Next one. Again, participatory approach I mentioned. Here you just have some information on the main actors that were engaged with us. Government, we have more than 25 representatives from different parts of the government. We have key partners from the Cabinet Affairs, Ministry of Education, Higher Education, Labor, and also the private sector, which has been an important counterpart in the activities in Sudan. 17 representatives from private sector companies, banks, telecoms, and business unions, NGOs, international organizations. Here you have a list of them. British Council is we are thankful for your collaboration. We were discussing about that earlier, and we had many meetings with these actors. Next slide, please. I think I'm over. Thank you very much. Please stay in touch. I thank all of you for the invitation. My email, name and titles of this will be shared, and you can contact me in case you need anything. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mattia, And I think one of the most interesting things that Mattia mentioned is about how the skills-based competency can actually make people global citizens. And this is something very interesting when it comes to looking at the skills. And also other thing, which is about the TVET. It's not just about the skills, it's also about the education. So thank you very much again, Mattia Olivari from UNESCO headquarters. He is the project officer for section of youth literacy and skills development. Thank you very much, Mattia. Hopefully we got everything sorted from our amazing Savannah team. I will introduce Savannah team, starting with Yusuf Yahya and Mariam Karen. They are the local consultant who are supporting the mapping study happening in Sudan for the TVET sector, and they are one of the amazing innovation labs that are working in the development in the economic sector. So without further ado, I will just hand it to the Savannah team. Over to you, Yusuf.
Yeah, I think you leave the best for last. So we're happy to do this thing. Maybe you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you guys so much. A lot of the points that you guys both mentioned align what we were going to say, but I'm just going to give you guys a brief overview in terms of what our stakeholder interviews kind of on ground revealed for us. So we had four different areas of people that we interviewed, the first being the public sector, second being the organizations that work within TVET, and then third being private sector, and then also the TVET centers themselves, or the VTCs. So we'll start off with the VTCs and then we'll work our way up. So on a government level, we'll start with the government and then work our way down. So on a government level, what we're seeing is that, again, just like John mentioned, a lot of the curriculum that's actually being taught in these vocational training centers are outdated. So most of them have been created in the 1970s onwards and haven't been updated since that happened. So because of that, it's not up to date in terms of the type of skills that are being taught, the information that's being taught, and then it doesn't prepare these vocational TVET graduates for the actual job market and the job that they're going to be pursuing once they graduate, right? Most of the courses that are being taught or programs that are taught are usually 3-year courses. When we interviewed TVET graduates, they did say that they have a preference for a short-term course rather than a 3-year course. The reason being is that with a short-term course, they're able to pursue employment opportunities right after they graduate, rather than waiting the 3 years and then finding a job. So they're able to do the short course, get an employment or find a job, and then once they find the job, then they're able to kind of expand on the knowledge that they have moving forward while also having some sort of income or revenue coming in. We also found that a lot of women-focused programs aren't very present within the TVET sector here in Sudan. So you get a broad idea of there's women development skills that are being taught. So within those skills, it usually includes hospitality, food processing, and tailoring or sewing. So you don't really see a lot of women that are working within the, say, manufacturing industry or agriculture, especially. Yeah, and then when it comes to the actual TVET centers themselves, or when we interviewed them, a lot of them did say that one of their core problems was that there was a lack of funding and government support coming in, or public sector support coming in. So with that, that becomes an issue because most of these vocational training centers are funded by the government and then ran by the government, according to the ministries that operate within that. Because of the lack of funding, what mostly happens is that these trainers within the vocational trainings, within these training centers, are underpaid. There's no constant development in terms of the skills that are being taught for them. So again, they're coming back to the outdated curriculum. So what they end up doing, because they're underpaid, is that they're actually pursuing 2 jobs at once. And then what usually happens is the second job that they get, they usually continue pursuing, and then they kind of just leave the training job behind. So again, there's like very limited trainers that are actually available within the market. 1, just general trainers, and then 2 trainers that are up to date in terms of what is actually needed within the job market, right? The best vocational training centers that we've, or the most efficient vocational training centers that we've seen are usually the private-owned vocational training centers. So the private-owned vocational training centers usually are part of a private sector company. So as these private sector companies, they will headhunt certain people that are already in a government-run vocational training center, and they'll headhunt the top 10, and then they'll recruit them into the private sector or within their company, and then they'll train them on what they exactly, like very specific skills that they need within that company, and then keep them for like a few years, I guess. Another problem that we found is that when we interviewed TVET graduates, or TVET students before they graduate, we found that a lot of them are very focused or have no intent in actually staying in Sudan. So they believe that they are able to find better job opportunities, especially in the Gulf area. So with that mentality, what happens is there's a lot of brain drain, right? It limits the, so there's a lot of brain drain that happens because of that. And if you don't have qualified people within the market to work the jobs that you need within the private sector, that becomes a very big issue. So again, even like the private sector, when they're tapping these people, they have issues with, or they are able to find people that are qualified enough or willing to stay in Sudan to kind of pursue those jobs. Yeah, so ideally, like what we found was that the best way moving forward is, you can't wait for the political, a lot has happened in Sudan for the last few months, but we can't expect the political climate to improve anytime soon. So in terms of, there's two things that we can do. You can either have a policy reform, or you can kind of build it from the bottom up with the private sector. So I think that's ideally the best path to kind of create like a very stable foundation. Yusuf is going to touch on our private sector engagement and then how we can further move past this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miriam, for covering all of that. With regards to the public sector, as you all know, the public sector is the largest employer in Sudan. But with the current political climate, this is not something that we can touch. And with regards to this grassroots movement, what can be done is that engaging TVET centers, engaging TVET graduates, in order for us to understand what kind of policies are needed in order for them to kind of deliver the output that is needed from them, right? So what happens with that is that you don't necessarily have to wait for things to be ready at the public sector, but you see what kind of outputs that we need to get from a lot of these TVET graduates, and we work on that. So for instance, previously in Sudan, there was a clear industrial and manufacturing policy that's in place. And based on that, a lot of these TVET centers built their long-term forecasting goals, right? So they knew that there was going to be X amount of jobs created, hence they needed X amount of people to graduate and do that. But right now, that second thing is lacking, right? So this is where people can actually intervene and work with the private sector to better understand what the private sector's needs are going to be moving forward in the future, and in order for us to be able to kind of subsidize those needs or fill the gap that the public sector is supposed to be filling. We won't be able to kind of do that for the longest, but we will be able to kind of create a bridge. So whenever the public sector's climate is a lot more conducive for people to kind of work with it, then that bridge has already been created, and we're not still at square zero talking about how can we engage TVET centers and how can we engage TVET graduates in a lot of these things. One of the main things that we're seeing because of the lack of this clear industrial policy or manufacturing policy is that a lot of these TVET centers are not sustainable, right? So once the donor exits, a lot of these TVET centers, they're not happening, right? So another thing that we can intervene in is how can we look at the models that TVET centers are currently being ran on, right? So how can we encourage a lot of these TVET centers to start doing revenue generating activities that will ensure that they're sustainable, right? Without them having to rely on the donors. The donor money wouldn't be needed to come in forms of TOTs, updated curriculums, and the structuring of this new modality, but it will also ensure that these TVET centers are sustainable over the long run. To zoom even further, John spoke about the demographics, and I think one important thing to speak about or to keep in mind while we look at these TVET centers is the rural-urban divide, right? So the rural young folk will migrate to urban centers, and then from urban centers they will leave the country, right? And this is where the brain drain happens. So some programs are going to be more focus on the rural areas, while others are going to be focused on urban areas. So in rural areas, a lot of the programs that we're seeing that are needed are around the agriculture, business incubation, around agriculture, value chain addition, in order for people to use things that are around in their environment. While in the urban centers, what we can see is that we are able to kind of introduce ICT focused programming that will be able to kind of bridge that gap. Because Muhammad, you just said a lot of these TVET centers are supposed to turn people into global citizens. Well, a big part of this global citizenship is being able to be up to date with all the conversation that are happening elsewhere, right? These are the wanted to chime in. If anybody has any questions or concerns, we would be more than happy to kind of add to that. So thank you, Muhammad.
Thank you, Mariam and Yusuf. Also for the lovely inputs. And I always love the part when you speak about how the VET centers need to be updated in terms of curriculum to kind of be up to date with what's happening globally, because as we're speaking, the skills are being updated and upgraded, and we can't really be stuck with curriculum that have been developed over the last decade. So that's something need to be a big focus area. So thank you very much to all our speakers. Now we are a bit zooming into the Q&As part of this session. Before we go to the questions, please, if you do have any questions regarding specific things that our speaker said or a general question for all of them, please use the Q&A icon to send your question through, and we'll make sure that these questions are directed to the speakers. So we'll start by the first question, and I think this question can go to all speakers. TVET is key to small and medium enterprises development, but there is a low social recognition of TVET. What are the efforts being made, especially for the youth and women who are really need to be involved, to be aware of this means of diversity skills learning? So the question is open to all speakers.
Mohammed, I'm happy to make a couple of comments, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, John. Go ahead.
I think it's a great question, and it maybe covers two aspects. The first is the SM or SMME, if you want to include micro engagement issue, which is really an important and you know, many studies show that as businesses get smaller, their willingness to engage with training reduces as well. That there's more perceived opportunity costs associated with training. They don't have the time, they don't have the capacity, and there's sort of residual fears that they may be training competition through their trainees, as it were. So it is an issue, and I suppose it's about running campaigns. It's about making practical toolkits, if you like, which helps employers to have the confidence and capacity to engage with training. That if you can make a practical approach to how training adds value to their business and how they can work with training providers, that makes it much more accessible. So so it's about campaigning, and it's about presenting practical routes for employers to engage with training providers. So that first question is a key one and an important one. And the access question and the inclusion question is also important, and of course, and one just to share an example, I've been doing a project in Mexico, and they've tried to run a campaign using mentors in STEM. So they've used women STEM employers and employees to be mapped to girls and women studying in the TVET sector who are interested in a STEM career as mentors, and that's had a huge impact in transitioning women STEM learners or trainees into the STEM profession and creating a network and a confidence that they need to look to pursue their professional ambitions. So just a couple of short interventions from me, but I'm sure fellow panelists would like to add to that as well.
So if I may just add a couple of points. I know that we are a bit in a rush. Please, Mohamed, tell us if we can answer or if we are binded by time. So I just want to add something. One point that regarding the fact that, particularly on the attractiveness of TVET. I think that one of the issue of attractiveness is one that's been raised by all of the countries have been working with. If you look at the available statistics on TVET participation, the enrollment in TVET programs is very low. And it's not only a problem of data collection, it's also a problem of actually attractiveness has been underlined by in the question. All countries face this, particularly in the context of emerging economies. That's something that we realized and we can evidence, we have evidence for that. One way that I want to highlight is potential instrument to increase the attractiveness is to create effective pathways between formal, non-formal and informal training and education systems in order to make sure that whoever is entering TVET can then find a way to be connected to other areas of education and the training systems in different countries. This increases the attractiveness because it offers a first-hand opportunity for people that want to just be trained and find the TVET programs attractive for them. And second, it can create a link with other education opportunities later on that may be more relevant as soon as somebody develops some specific skills or is training particularly in specific areas. The second thing that I wanted to highlight about the attractiveness of TVET is to make sure that we align TVET offer with the supply, the TVET offer with the demand from the labor market. As soon as we make sure that everything that we offer in terms of training and skill development is aligned with the market, TVET increases attractiveness as a consequence because people will start to, in particular, several cases, people as a urgency to find a job, to be trained, to get a productive, let's say, a decent work, to get like a salary. TVET may help in that, but it's useless to have a TVET program if the TVET program does not provide the skills which are needed by the specific concepts, specific labor market characteristics of the country where the program is launched. We have many cases that we can use as an example. We have another project conducted by UNESCO called BEAR, and this program worked, for example, in Botswana. They identified the hospitality sector and they worked as a pilot on this sector to increase the attractiveness of TVET in this specific domain by providing a number of skills that were particularly demanded by the job market in the hospitality sector. Success was great. We got like statistics in terms of enrollment in the TVET programs skyrocketing with respect to previous years because people recognize that thanks to this TVET participation, they could have found a job. So these are the two cents I wanted to add: learning pathways and alignment between supply of skills and demand.
Thank you, Mattia. And for the sake of time, we'll take only one question. It's good that this question is direct to you, Mattia, and it's kind of you started building up to answering this question. The question is coming from the audience, which is a couple of people asking about the links between different places, different countries. I think this is feeding directly to the national qualification framework that you've mentioned as part of your presentation. If you can just tell us more about the NFQ in Sudan and how it can be linked. It can be an actual link for skills in different places, and for example, different countries.
Just a couple of words about that. So Sudan does not have an NQF actually, but we have a skill program that was identified as one of the most important areas of action for us. For the time being, we are in a state, as I mentioned during the presentation, we have some reports that have been delivered and prepared by the national team. Essentially, our work in this domain has been to raise and increase capacity regarding the NQF. The work on the national qualification framework started in 2018. With involvement of the CAPET team that started discussion, and basically what we try to do is to bring experiences of other countries in implementing and developing their own national qualification frameworks. The idea is that the first step when developing one is in a country where there's no NQF available is to explain the benefits that can derive from the introduction of such a tool. So this is what we did by showing experiences of other countries, but also by trying to explain what could derive from the implementation of national qualification framework at national level in terms of if we would produce an effective one, like aligned with the needs of the labor market, so aligned with the concrete reality of South Sudan, The situation has been that we discussed a lot with the team locally, and we identified some national experts that could contribute to the first, let's say, first understanding of the needs of the country in terms of NQF. We identified some international experts that will work with us. The work is ongoing because due to the conflict and all the societal issues that that of course Sudan has been through over the last months, there have been some issues in having experts coming and working directly on the NQF. But national team that was already operative in the country developed some reports that are now used as a baseline to promote further work in this area, and this work will continue in 2022 as one of the priorities for the CAPET program and the work plan. But just for you to know, we basically started by creating the capacity and inform about the benefits of the NQF, and now we are starting to operate from the national level, and then we will bring some international expertise in to develop further the national verification framework.
Great to hear this will happen this year, and it will carry on until we have the national qualification framework actually ready and supporting the TVET ecosystem in Sudan. Before we wrap up this session, I will give each of our speakers a 30-minute chance to give a summary of what they said and what they want to say in terms of unlocking the potential of TVET to support the development communities. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Mohammed. I'll be brief. I mean, it's easy to become preoccupied by the challenges and even perhaps overwhelmed, but I think also we always need to be mindful of the opportunities and the huge contribution that technical vocational education training can make to economic development. And I think with the right structures, tapping into the huge enthusiasm of people working in the sector, it will and it can make a massive difference. And it's exactly through those types of frameworks that Matthew was describing, the alignment between training employers, the demonstration of the transformative effect good training can have on people's lives, their communities, and the economy, will have that long-term sustainable impact that will result in a stronger economy, stronger communities, and more positive lives as well. So it's an important topic. Thank you to everyone for their interest, and I know through the work that we're doing at the British Council, we're very excited to be making a contribution to it. So thanks, Mohammed, and thanks to all.
So on my side, again, thanks everybody for inviting me to speak here. Thanks for my team at UNESCO that coordinates locally the activities of the CAPET program. I'm very thankful for that. I think that what John said is real. TVET is very important. It is a subsector of the education system that we need to focus on the more and more in the coming years, particularly because he has a proven capacity to deliver results. We need to increase the attractiveness. That's something that's been raised, but we definitely understand this is a priority for many countries that needs to advertise the role of TVET in their different socioeconomic context. And again, I want to stress here, just concluding this socioeconomic context, we as UNESCO perform this TVET policy reviews. What I want to say is that it's very important to first, before talking about TVET, understanding the reality of the country, understanding what is the socioeconomic context, providing sort of a diagnosis of what are the problems. Otherwise, we're just talking about, we say in Italian, fried air, something which is not, is useless. We need to identify the problems and then provide solutions. We do that. We have some tools, frameworks to analyze the problems and provide solutions. We define the strategy in order to guide these interventions. We have some programs, and we're happy to collaborate with you in case there are possibilities of synergies that I'm sure there are already. So happy and thanks to collaborate with you in the future.
Yusuf and Mariam.
Hello? Yes. Hi. Yeah. We couldn't hear you for a bit there.
No, that's fine. So over to you.
Can you hear us, Mohammed?
Yes, loud and clear, Yusuf.
Hello?
Yusuf
Mohammed,
and
can you hear us?
I was hoping to have last last words from Yusuf and Miriam, but they are facing some technical issues today. So at the end, I would like to thank our speakers for their amazing contribution today. And most importantly, I would like to also thank our audience for the lively interesting questions. Although we didn't have the time to go through all of them, but they are very interesting questions. I'm sure they will ignite the discussions among our team and UNESCO team as well. So yeah, yes.
I think we're back online.
Now we do have the team. Yes, back. Now we do have the opportunity to say your last words, Yusuf and Miriam.
Yeah, I apologize for those technical difficulties. Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, no, when it comes to TVET, there's a lot of potential, and then especially when you look at the context of Sudan. And again, coming back to a lot of what we said, and then also the speakers as well, we just need to have the right infrastructure and support to kind of enable it. I think the best way for it moving forward is a kind of engagement from both the public and the private sector to help build it out and then kind of push it forward. But yeah, I think I'm good.
Yeah, and I think just given the political atmosphere here in Sudan right now, I think the comprehensive engagement with TVET centers and with the private sector to ensure that there is a clear roadmap for the private sector. I mean, because at the end of the day, we want to create employment opportunities to be able to understand what the future looks like in order for us to be able to design these curriculums, in order for us to kind of those participants and Sudanese youth, in order for them to have the skills needed, in order for them to be able to be active citizens. Thank you, Muhammad, and thank you everybody else on the panel. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can feel free to get in touch with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Yusuf and Mariam, and to all our speakers. Before we end these sessions, I hope we have clearly demonstrated the importance of TVET to supporting the growing economies to developed countries. So before we end this session, I would like to ask our audience if you could please give us feedback in the chat box, rating this event in terms of from 1 to 5. Giving 5 is very useful, 1 is not useful. This will definitely help us into shaping our next sessions. So please take the time to do so, and thank you very much for your time today, and thank you again for our speakers, and also to our team on the backstage making all this happen. Thank you everyone, and have a good day.